Leader Scalise, it's good to have you on, and I see some glimmers of hope here in something that might work for these debt ceiling talks. We had, as you know, we had Speaker McCarthy on the show earlier this week after he sent that letter to the White House, and we're having a hard time seeing any common ground. But in the permitting arena, i.e., Joe Manchin, other Democrats that have, and people on the left that want renewable permits. Is that a fertile ground for maybe some negotiation or bipartisanship, Leader?
Well, yeah, good morning, Joe. Great to be with you. And we got a great bill on the floor today, the Lower Energy Costs Act. As you talked about, permitting reforms, a lot of other important reforms. What the real focus is on lowering costs for American families and making our own energy in America. It's not just the permitting process, it's the leasing process. It's all the convoluted, tangled web of red tape in the way of building even energy infrastructure like pipelines. And so we remove all of those barriers so that we can make our own energy again. And keep in mind, nobody makes energy cleaner in the world than the United States of America. And yet Joe Biden, through his attacks on American energy for 2 years now, has made it harder to make energy in America, but made us dependent on countries that don't have the good standards we have. Why should he be begging Putin for Russian oil that is nowhere near as clean as ours? Venezuela, Iran's making more oil. We need to be making more oil and natural gas, moving it around through pipelines. Bring in more critical minerals, by the way. He talks about EVs. You mentioned the EVs. You know what? Over 70% of the electric vehicle batteries are made in China because President Biden won't let us mine those critical minerals in America at a much cleaner environmental impact. So let's get rid of our dependence on China.
This would be great in 2024, I think. And elections have consequences. If you had a Republican in the White House and maybe the Senate could get there eventually. But right now, they're already promising a veto, and there's things in here that you just know are not going to fly with Democrats. You're going to repeal parts of the big climate law that was recently passed. They got a 50-year-old National Environmental Policy Act that's sacrosanct to many environmentalists. So most of this stuff, and even the leases, that's not going to fly right now. It's just going to get vetoed. But the permitting stuff, it's been said that could be a bargaining chip that maybe Republicans could use to maybe at least everyone gets a safe face with this debt ceiling debate. Because right now, do you agree both sides are entrenched? The president just says it's got to be a clean bill. And Leader McCarthy and his caucus are saying that they're looking at a lot of spending cuts, but also maybe this permitting could be used as as a bargaining chip.
Yeah, as it relates to the debt ceiling, Speaker McCarthy, like you mentioned, sent another letter to the president because it's been almost 2 months since the president sat down with Speaker McCarthy last to talk about how to deal with not just the debt ceiling, but out-of-control spending in Washington that's driving us to get to this point. I mean, the debt ceiling represents literally the nation's credit card getting maxed out. So you don't solve that problem by giving the president another credit card to go max out. I think everybody in America gets that. You also got to get control over spending as you're talking about the debt ceiling. So we laid out a number of things that will do that. For example, work requirements. Right now, the federal government's paying billions of dollars to pay millions of people to sit at home and not work when everybody's looking for workers. And not only is that bad for the economy and for rising inflation, it hurts Social Security because those people aren't paying into Social Security. They're taking money out of the taxpayer's pocket. So there's a lot of good opportunities for us to have a negotiation on the debt ceiling. President Biden's just got to do his job. He is trying to run out the clock right now and create a debt crisis. That's not good for our country. So that's what Speaker McCarthy was doing, was just saying, look, it's time for us to get back to work.
Yeah, but both sides are dug in, and the president says, I'm waiting for the Republicans to have a budget, and Leader McCarthy said, well, your budget was late, so ours is going to be late. And right now, it looks like the Republican budget, the House budget, is going to be after the debt ceiling already expires. So, if the president insists
and the budget doesn't have anything to do with the debt ceiling.
I understand that, but the president can pretend it does, and that's what he keeps saying to dig in.
He could try to, talk about, the Easter Bunny and all that. We need to deal with the problems that are in front of us, and that's what we're trying to do. The president needs to do that as well.
What does a real solution look like at this point? Because you saw, the 19th largest bank in the country can send shockwaves, through the financial system, when it goes into receivership. This is a whole different level of angst and flux, and I mean, this would be disastrous. So what is the end game when you got the president dug in here, and the kind of things you're talking about probably aren't going to happen. He's not going to agree to a lot of those things. What is the end game to actually doing it?
Yeah, and Joe, the end game is for adults to get in a room and talk. This idea of the president saying, I'm not going to sit down and talk with you unless you show me things that are unrelated to the problem, so that he can run the clock out and create a crisis. Stop trying to create crises, as you mentioned, with the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, which, by the way, was partially driven by the inflation that Joe Biden's created. Let's have a solution that not just addresses the debt ceiling, but also gets at the fundamental problem of what is driving inflation, and that's too much spending in Washington. That's why the credit card got maxed out. Why don't we, while we're talking about paying off the minimum balance on the credit card, also talk about not maxing out the next credit card, too? Let's get control over spending and get some savings for the taxpayer. That will not only stop us from having continued debt ceiling crises, it'll also lower inflation, which right now is a gut punch to hardworking families across America. You can solve both at the same time, but the president's got to sit down in a room with the speaker. He can't delay this. It's been almost 2 months. I don't know what he's waiting for. But again, I think he wants to wait until the midnight hour and get the whole country spun up in a crisis. Most people in America don't want that.
Hey, Leader Scalise, I think the big question, the overriding question is, should the debt ceiling be used as a cudgel to force one side or the other to negotiate? I mean, there's a constant debate about that, and it seems to me that whatever leader or whatever party is in power thinks that it should not be used as a cudgel. Whatever party is not in power thinks that it should, because it's their only way to get heard. And it flip-flops on that. They are pointing to the last couple of times where they plastic clean one and didn't use it as a negotiating tactic. I just want to make sure that you will say that next time you are in power, this should not be something that is not negotiated over. I mean, it passes back and forth. It's a political weapon. It's always used by the party that's not in power.
Yeah, and Becky, it's a good point, and I think what you've got to look at is first, what's good for the country? Having out-of-control spending, massive debt, trillions of dollars in debt added on to what's already a massive debt crisis, that's not good for the country. And so if you look at debt ceilings in the past, over the last 30 years, you've seen debt ceilings used for things like Graham-Rudman-Hollings, Graham-Latta. A lot of big budget reforms have come out of debt ceiling negotiations.
It doesn't have anything to do with the actual debt ceiling, and that's the bigger question.
Well, but no, spending is the reason that we've hit. Well, the reason we've hit the debt ceiling is because of spending. Spending is what maxed out the nation's credit card. If we're taking in $1 and spending $1.29 in Washington, that's the problem. If we were taking in $1 and spending $1, there would be no maxed out debt ceiling. So the reason the debt ceiling gets hit is because 29 cents is being spent more for every dollar that comes in. Let's get control over that side.
Why did the Democrats spend all that money? Because they can, because they got elected for whatever reason a couple of years ago. So it's already done.
And that's why we got the majority to help fix this.
But they had their constituents that put them in power. CHIPS Act, IRA, take your pick, trillions of dollars. Yeah. But it's done.
It adds up.
And it's done.
Yeah, and let's get this country back on track.
Got to be paid for. So it's already done. And losing the election was the first mistake for Republicans, right?
Well, but let's fix the problem, and I think we can find a lot of common ground on that. The president's got to sit down. He can't hide from this problem.
Right. All right, we understand. I like both sides. They both got and they're both very fervent and passionate, and we need that. That's what's so great about divided government. Thanks for your time today, Leader.